Hello, hello, hello. You all know what time it is. Just don't let the sleep get you down. Things are moving fast, but hold on tight and you will let it go. Someday yes. Someday we will be free. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am glad to see you all here again. LaRuelist Cafe. Today it is not my show. You all know who I am, Janine LaRue. Today it is about the Capital City Area Black Caucus. We are honored to be able to sponsor this show today that is being hosted by the Black Caucus. And without further ado, we're going to bring in one of the founders because you all are waiting. You're waiting for the main entree. We know who the main entree is. And what you need to do is get up tomorrow morning and look at Morning Joe so you can see what else he has to say. Because he always has something important to say. So if you're not looking at Morning Joe this week, don't act as though you're in love with him today. Because Morning Joe is where we need turn the channels on and we need those ratings to keep going up. So without further ado, we're going to bring in one of the founders. He is a Jersey boy trying to act like he now lives in Colorado. That's okay. We'll accept it for a New York minute. We call him the man, John Bailey. Come on, Mr. Producer, bring him on. How you doing, John?
Good, Janine, good. Let me just say, before I get into the thank yous and all, to my friend and one of the great minds of our time, Dr. Eddie Glaude, the panelists, and the listening audience, thank you for being here this evening. As a Black person in America, there are certain behaviors that are immediately punishable by death. This list is always growing, but here is a helpful starting point. Wearing a hoodie, holding your wallet, selling CDs, selling cigarettes, holding a BB gun or a pellet gun, no matter your age, attending Bible class, running too fast down any street, sitting in your car, walking home, riding a commuter train, attending a birthday party, having car trouble, being rude, listening to music, laughing too loud, driving with a missing license plate, broken tailpipe, failing to signal a lane change, walking away from police, walking towards police, standing still, not complying with police, complying with police, jogging down the street, sleeping in your own bed, trying to get a change for a $20 bill, sleeping in your own car, standing in front of a store, not standing in front of a store. Janine, on behalf of the members of the Capital City Area Black Caucus, we thank you in the LaRuelist Cafe for hosting CCABC this evening for this critical conversation. Our caucus was started 2.5 years ago to put forward a thoughtful and active and progressive voice for Black citizens in Trenton and Mercer County. Our goal is gaining ground in the Black community. Our theme is an investment in the Black community, is an investment in the African-American citizens of Trenton, Mercer County, and New Jersey. Our vision is to be a focal point of collaboration, communication, and community action in the Black communities of Trenton and Mercer County. And our mission is dedicated to improving the quality of life for Black citizens in Trenton, Mercer County, and gaining ground in the Black community through advocacy, education, information, and program. One of our programs is the Trenton Future Series, which is a series of monthly discussions on the future of the city and on critical issues and topics impacting African-American cities in the capital city area. These ongoing monthly discussions before the pandemic, we were meeting every second Saturday at 12 noon in the Trenton Y. And CBC's community outreach and leadership effort to enhance the conversation in the community around supportive Black community initiatives and Black community leadership. The purpose of the Trend Future series is to get Trend citizens to focus on and start discussing the best that the city and the citizens have to offer each other, as well as a partnership role each of us has to play if Trenton is to realize the greatness of being the capital city of New Jersey. Each month, these critical community discussions will be held with experts, community leaders, faith leaders, elected officials, seniors, education and business leaders, active citizens, and others concerned about the future of our capital city and the place many of us call home. This evening discussion and presentations by my friend Eddie Glaude is such a meeting. The Trend Future series of meetings have been happening monthly in the last 2.5 years. We have discussed every issue and hot topic in the capital city area but one, and that is the state of Black Mercer County residents. We need a disparity study in Mercer County in the areas of healthcare, education, business, development, public safety, and affordable housing. What we will find out from such a study is that in most areas of social progress in this country and in the county, that the Black community is further behind now than before the civil rights movement. In essence, we are losing ground. Our goal tonight and moving forward is to move the Black community towards gaining ground. And what are the strategies to do that? The capital City Area Black Caucus is a vehicle to help us do just that. With that said, and before I introduce him, let me take a minute and congratulate on him for his leadership in bringing the Black Lives Matter resolution to the freeholders and to the citizens of Mercer County. Sam Frisbee, big move. Ladies and gentlemen, my brother and CCABC founding member, Mercer County freeholder, Sam Frisbee.
Good evening. How's everybody doing out there? John, thank you so much for that. And we're just so proud that we were part of that generation of folks that started this process. You know, as a freeholder here in Mercer County, I recognize that we have a lot of things to work on in our own county and in our state. You know, if protest is the voice of the unheard, then riot is the language of the perpetually ignored. And what we're seeing all around this nation right now are people that have been ignored and people that need to be heard right now. You know, there's something inherently inequitable and racist about our society right now. And it has been for years, for over 400 years. But we see those inequities coming to pass because social media allows us to see everything right now in real time. And we see it come to pass when you have a mob of white people that have guns outside their state capital, and they are in protest and engaging their police in not such a friendly way, but everybody goes home and everybody's alive. Yet we saw what happened with George Floyd, a man who was accused of passing some dollars that might have been funny, but he's dead today. We need to make a change. When we see a young white man that goes into a church and kills 8 Black folks, and he is on the run, and when he's found alive, and the police even take him to a fast food restaurant to get something to eat because he's hungry. Yet last night in Atlanta, a Black man fell asleep, whether it was in the drive-thru or on the drive-thru property. He's no longer with us today. We have to make a change. We need a reset. You know, police violence is just the tip of the spear for this. We're really talking about systemic, institutional, and structural racism. Let's talk about New Jersey just for a quick second. In New Jersey, the wealth gap is $303,000 between white families and Black families. Let me put that in context. The average white family in New Jersey can put their hands on $309,000 worth of wealth. The average Black family, $5,800 worth of wealth. If you put 10 white families in a room, that'd be almost $3.1 million. If you put 10 Black families in that same room, $58,000. There's something inherently wrong with that. And in New Jersey, your income drives where you actually live, which drives what school system you're going to be a part of. And so we see in New Jersey, we have the 3rd most segregated school district in the nation. We're more segregated than the Deep South here in New Jersey. Something's got to change. We need a reset. You know, the median income, and let's just talk about Mercer for a second. The median income in Mercer County is $80,000. Yet the median income in Trenton, which is predominantly Black and brown community, is $36,000 a year. Now, Mercer's $80,000 includes Trenton's 36. If you took Trenton's 36,000 out, it'd be a lot higher in Mercer. We need a reset. I I want to say congratulations to my freeholder colleagues who passed 7-0 on last Thursday's meeting, a resolution supporting Black Lives Matter, because the reality is that until we can say that Black Lives Matter, we can't truly say that all lives matter. And I know there have been a lot of people who have had that debate and discussion. We recognize that we have to say that Black lives matter, and they supported that resolution. As a matter of fact, I believe that we were the first freeholder board in the state, and there will be another to follow tomorrow night, I believe, up in Essex County. So we're very excited about being the first to do that, but that doesn't mean a lot if we don't do the work. You know, one of the things that I've asked the Capital City area, the Freeholder Board to begin to look at is the development of a human relations committee, where we can really begin to look at the disparities across our county, because we can't begin to direct money to where our community is hurting the most unless we know where that actually is. And so recognizing that, it leads me to an incredible gentleman that we've invited to come on our show, and I'm incredibly excited. You know, Dr. Glaude was at Mercer County College about 1.5 years ago. He and I were on a panel together, and he is so ingratiating that when we invited him 12 days ago to say, hey, look, we'd like for you to come on with the Capital City Area Black Caucus, he didn't say no. He said yes, and he said yes pretty quickly, recognizing that he is a national figure that is doing a lot of work in this particular area. So when we began to talk about, you know, whether or not the nation was hearing us and whether they were hearing people, we couldn't think of a better person to come on and talk to us than Dr. Eddie Glaude. He's an intellectual who speaks to the complex dynamics of the American experience. His most well-known books, The Democracy in Black, How Race Still Enslaves the American Soul, and In Shades of Blue, a pragmatism in the politics of Black America. He's done incredible work along those areas. But what I'm most excited about is he's a critic of American tradition, right? Not in a bad way, but in the ways that James Baldwin and Ralph Waldo Emerson were, to hold the nation accountable for how it treats its communities. And so we are so excited to have him come on here. He has incredible accolades. He is the James McDonough Distinguished University Professor, Chair of the Department of African American Studies at Princeton University. He is all that in a bag of chips. And so we are glad to have him here with us to talk to us about the issues that we're seeing play out on social media and on the news across this nation, and to bring us some different perspective. Our friend, Dr. Eddie Glaude.
Thank you so much, Freeholder Frisbee, for that generous introduction. I want to thank Sister LaRue for making this platform, this conversation possible. The Capital City Area Black Caucus, for all of the wonderful work that you're doing. Brother Bailey, I know him from his work with kids, and particularly my son. Thank you for your continued dedication to us. It's important in these times that we love us in public, right? That we have to love each other unconditionally in these moments, because we're experiencing another one of those traumatic shifts and transformations. So I'm delighted for the invitation. I'm delighted to have an opportunity to dialogue with you. I hope I say something that could be of some use as we try to respond to this moment. I've been running my mouth a lot lately. I hope there's some substance here. I pray that there is. So hopefully the Lord will use me tonight to drop some seeds, I hope. So we're at a crossroads as a nation, once again. And to my mind, the crossroads is a blues metaphor. It's what Robert Johnson supposedly experienced when he had to make a choice about what direction he was going to live his life. And out of that came the blues. And of course, the blues is a metaphor for our experience in America, a country that is supposedly founded on the idea of principles of democracy, the ideas of freedom, liberty, and equality. But wrapped around the legs of the table upon which the Declaration of Independence was signed was the serpent of slavery. the serpent of white supremacy. And that serpent threatens today to swallow the whole thing, the entire thing whole. We're at a crossroads. We have to make a decision about whether or not we're going to truly be a multiracial democracy. The idea that America is the land of the free, that contradiction has been brought into full view. We heard the freeholder lay out the disparities in Mercer County, but we know that those disparities exist across the nation. And we know that the history of our country is such that those contradictions are not exceptions, but in fact the result of us building the nation true. That this blueprint has evidenced itself in the way in which the country is organized in our social, economic, and political arrangements. But we're at a crossroads. There is a moral reckoning in front of us. And we've confronted two moments, I would argue, historically, in which the nation had to make a choice about whether or not it was going to be a truly multiracial democracy. I'd like to think of the first moment is often called by historians as the second founding. This is the period of radical reconstruction after the carnage of civil war fought on the basis of slavery, over the issue of slavery. And then we had an opportunity, a moment where we could actually organize our society based not on white supremacy, but where Black folk would be brought into the body politic and exercise the full rights of citizenship. 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments passed. A notion, the modern understanding of the American nation state emerges during this period, right? The notion of liberty and citizenship transformed, right? Made more robust during this period. And what do we get in response to radical reconstruction? It is a revolution in some ways of the very way in which we understand ourselves. We get a counter-revolution, as the historian David Blight reminds us, that the second founding brought forth a backlash. What was the content of that backlash? It had everything to do with the emergence of Jim Crow laws, racial apartheid in the South, another form of slavery called convict leasing. In other words, in the face of the choice of what kind of nation would we be, who do we aspire to be, the nation doubled down on its ugly commitments, doubled down on the idea, as I wrote in Democracy in Black, that white people ought to matter more than others. You see, at the heart of the American project is a lie. This idea that we are the shining city on the hill, as Ronald Reagan put it, this idea that America is an example of democracy achieved, that is and has been a lie. Why? Because that democracy was born, as I've mentioned, right, birthed in the context of a society committed to the evil, the cruelty, the barbarity of slavery. And here in this moment, in the second founding, the nation has an opportunity to imagine itself apart from that lie. But the serpent wrapped around the legs of the table, right, was denied, right? Instead, they doubled down on the ugliness. That's the first moment, crossroads. We failed miserably. The second moment, often by historians, is described by historians as the second Reconstruction, And that is the Black freedom struggle of the mid-20th century. We typically tell that story in a narrow way, Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, the Montgomery bus boycott in 55, the emergence of Dr. King's voice. We talk about student sit-ins in the throughout the 1960s, or 1960 in the organization and the founding of SNCC. We'll talk about that extraordinary moment in 1963 in the March on Washington, and somebody might mention 65 with the March on Selma. We talk about the legislation of 64 and 65 with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, and then we jump to 68 and King's murder. And then we tell a story of decline, and that's the story of Black power, where our rage and anger, right, took over. At least that's the story we tell. But in this moment, you see Black folk pushing for the nation to actually fulfill the promise of the first Reconstruction. But what do we get in response? We get calls for law and order, not just simply in the Nixon regime, but actually in Johnson, we get it calls for law and order in response to peaceful protesters in the South. Right? If you read the Kerner Commission report, one of the features of that important report has everything to do with expansion of law enforcement, right? Expansion of policing, trying in some ways to police the very ways in which we, right, respond to our conditions of living. But what do we get in response to the Second Reconstruction? We get this call for law and order that leads to the expansion of the carceral state. What else do we get? We get the tax revolt in California. What is that? Right, that tax revolt involved, right, the fate, white Americans responding to the face of poverty, becoming Black. Some of you remember when Robert Kennedy went down to the Delta of Mississippi and he rubbed the face of that young Black girl. And suddenly all of the policies of the New Deal became policies that were directed to Black and brown people. The Great Society was read as this massive redistribution of wealth where government, bad government, would take, right, the hard-earned work of white people, the hard-earned earnings of white folk, and redistribute it to the lazy folk, these lazy Black and brown folk, a tax revolt. What else did we see? We saw the hard hat rebellions, working class white folk. We saw this clamoring of the so-called silent majority. In other words, the nation in that moment in which we could finally reimagine ourselves as a truly multiracial democracy, double down on its ugly commitments. This idea of whiteness reasserted itself. The serpent threatened to swallow the whole thing whole. And here we are in this moment, facing a similar kind of reckoning, where the ugliness of our past and present made themselves known. 8 minutes and 46 seconds. As Officer Chavin in Minneapolis, Minnesota, had his knee on the neck of George Floyd. And of course, this moment is the result of the backlash against the election of Barack Obama. What did we get in response? Some people were saying with Obama's election, we had turned the corner. Right. But what did we get in response to Obama's election? We got voter suppression and voter ID laws, and then we vomited up Donald Trump. So again, in a moment where it seems that the nation could be otherwise, we double down on ugliness. Is that right? I think so, yeah. And now, with the public lynching of George Floyd, we find ourselves in this inflection point, right? At this crossroads, this inflection point, where we have an opportunity to imagine ourselves otherwise, I think. The ugliness of Donald Trump is in full view. But I want to insist, and I only have a little bit more time left, I think. I want to insist that we not exceptionalize Donald Trump. That we not, shall we say, displace all of our sins onto him and believe that if only we get rid of Donald Trump, then all of our problems will be solved. No. The protests that we're seeing all around the country and all around the world, or at least in the United States particularly, is not reducible to the last 3.5 years. The last 3.5 years is only an exaggeration of what we've been experiencing for the last 40 plus years. What we are witnessing, I believe, in this moment, and we could talk about this as it pertains specifically to Mercer County, is the kind of evidence of the contradictions and bankruptcy of a political and economic ideology that has had the nation by the throat for at least 40 years. What are we talking about? We're talking about the advent of Reaganism in 1980, right? And why would I go all the way back there? Well, think about it. The last major piece of legislation that was passed, a part of the Great Society, was, I think, the Fair Housing Act of 1968. As flawed as it was an attempt to address, the reality of residential segregation and what followed from that. As Freeholder Frisbee just laid out, we are as segregated today as we were back then. Right? 12 years later, just 12 years after the passage of the Fair Housing Act of 1968, the country elected Ronald Reagan. And for those who were a part of the Black Power movement, Ronald Reagan is as notorious as George Wallace, given what he did as governor of California. So when the nation elected Ronald Reagan as the kind of redeemer in chief, it was a backhand slap to the face of Black America. And what did Reagan represent? Not just simply his presidential campaign speech in Neshoba County, the place where where Goodwin, Schwerner, and Cheney were murdered. Not just simply that, right? But Reagan represented an ideology of whiteness, right? Wrapped in the charm of a Hollywood B movie actor. Sounds familiar, yes? Instead, we have a reality show actor now. And what did he do? He introduced an ideology that fundamentally upended, right, our basic conception of the public good. Reaganism was part of a broader economic and political philosophy. We might call it neoliberalism in London or Britain. It was thought of as Thatcherism. But what did it involve? It involved changing the emphasis in our economy from the stakeholders to shareholders. It involved, in some ways, taking the knees out from under everyday ordinary workers as they bust their behinds to make ends meet, but still barely keep their noses above water. So what have we seen since the 1980s? We've seen the destruction and the erosion of union representation in our country as workers continue to slide into deepening states of precarity, trying to make ends meet, not being able to make a living wage, working 40, 50 hours a week and still having to make choices about whether or not they could pay the rent or put food on the table. We see tax cuts that had everything to do with extraction of resources from everyday ordinary people, working people, and transferring that monies to the rich. So we get a deepening divide. That wealth gap that Freehold Frisbee talked about, right, was exacerbated by the Reagan years. Tax cuts that involved an evisceration of the social safety net as what? You had a rhetoric designed, right, to tell that government welfare programs became entitlement programs where bad government infringed upon the liberties of white folk and engaged in the redistribution of wealth from those who worked hard to those who just simply wanted a handout. Black folk were just simply, engaged in a discourse of victimization. This is the Reagan year. These are the Reagan years, right? Arguments about being tough on crime, a form of policing rooted, right, in a certain set of assumptions about communities. What this tough on crime bound up with this discourse of a law and order kind of frame that has everything to do with the response to keeping us in our cages. This tough on crime approach, right, finding its most forceful articulation in the war on drugs. What happens as a result? You get a race to the bottom in terms of the criminal code as Democrats and Republicans try to prove that they are the toughest on crime. And so we get this expansion of the criminal code that's where you can damn near sneeze and break a law in the country. What else do we see? We see the militarization of the police as military-grade weaponry transferred to local police departments and deployed in our communities. So you get an expansion of the criminal code, you get the militarization of police, and what do you get? You get the expansion of police itself, right? Where you get these large armies that in some ways occupy cities, right? There's an aggressive form of policing that emerges out of the framing of tough on crime that presupposes the inherent criminality of our communities and the inherent criminality of Black and brown peoples, and is parallel with the expansion of incarcerating Black folk, putting us in jails, putting us in prison, keeping us under surveillance, right? And so you end up with communities that are over-policed, over-surveilled, over-policed, and underprotected. These are the Reagan years. In the midst of the debates around George Floyd, what we can begin to say, the debates and the protest, is that George Floyd's murder, public lynching, yes, right, is the response has been a layer of accumulated grief and accumulated suffering. That the response is not just simply to his murder. George Floyd has become a kind of synecdoche, a part for the whole a kind of point of entry to a country that feels like it's broken. And young people are in the streets precisely because of that. These are young folk who put everything on the line in 2014 when you had a black man in the White House and you still had the murder of Mike Brown for what? Walking down the middle of the street. That's that criminal code I'm talking about that increases the likelihood of our encounter with police. And whenever police are involved in an encounter with everyday ordinary citizens, we must remember that they have the capacity to use legal deadly force, as we just saw last night with Rashad Brooks in Atlanta, right? But these young folk put everything on the line in 2004, right? And confronted the military greed of the military weaponry of the police. And what happened? Nothing, for the most part. Nothing changed. Just think about it. In March of 2020, the police killed as many folk in March of 2020 as they killed in March of 2019, COVID-19 notwithstanding. Those young people who put everything on the line have come of age in a moment of catastrophe and disaster. Hurricane Katrina, the Great Recession, mass school shootings, global pandemic, and now this. No wonder they're clamoring for a different America, because they know that America as it is broken. Is broken. In this moment of profound transition and possible transformation, we are experiencing a moral reckoning at the national level, at the state level, and at the local level. We have to imagine ourselves differently. James Baldwin writes that he wants us to do something unprecedented, to imagine, to create a self without the need of enemies. Can we begin to imagine an America where white supremacy no longer reigns? Can we imagine an America where all of her people have not only the right to dream dreams, but can make those dreams a reality? We stand in the breach. And what we cannot tolerate in this moment are people who are more interested in safety and comfort than going big in the midst of the transition. What I've tried to suggest to you is that what we are experiencing is the collapse of a political ideology. Ronald Reaganism is broken. It is bankrupt, and Trumpism is just an exaggerated version of that. And if we're going to change the way in which we live our lives, we cannot tinker around the edges. We can't allow them who are engaged in bad faith debates get us distracted when we talk about defunding the police, when they know what we mean is transforming the very way in which we think of public safety in this country. That we can actually begin to address what is happening in resource-deprived communities. Notice how the adjective I use, resource-deprived communities, by investing in communities. What does it mean that the city of New York spends $6 billion on policing? One of the largest police forces in the world. What would it mean to transfer those funds, to redeploy those funds into housing and mental health and into employment and education? What would it mean for resource-deprived communities to begin to think of a public infrastructure of care instead of an emphasis on policing and incarceration, keeping us in our cages or keeping us in our place? Lord, we are grappling with the burden of our history. We have to go big. Too many people have put their bodies on the line to open up this space. We can't allow folk who are actually invested in the status quo, who are committed to a notion of civility more than they are to an idea of justice. We can't tinker around the edges. We have to fundamentally reimagine who we are. As I argue in my new book, we have to begin again. And this involves encountering our history. I'm going to come to a close, but I wanted to read some passages from the new book, if you don't mind. We see.
You don't have to come to a close. You better keep going, because you just took us to church, so just keep going.
I'll just read on this, Ms. LaRue, and then we can, because I would love to have the dialogue. Because, it's interesting to show you that the public lynching of George Floyd wasn't just simply about policing. Protesters are vandalizing and toppling Confederate statues. They are literally attacking the built environment that actually reflects what I've called the value gap. Got that statue in Richmond, Virginia, celebrating that racist Robert E. Lee. You got the statue of Robert E. Lee still in Emancipation Park in Charlottesville, Virginia, where Heather Heyer was murdered. And Stonewall Jackson, and you got slave auction blocks. And you see protesters really trying to, in some ways, address the haunting of our history by literally saying, you are celebrating these folk and we want a different America. So we're going to rid ourselves of this iconography, this symbolism of hate, this ideology to a lie. Because we know that the statues were put up because of the lost cause. We know that the monuments were in some ways a way of terrorizing Black folk as we were being put down by Jim Crow laws. We know that the monuments and statues and the tributes to the Confederacy was all about a response to our pressure from below as we were trying to break the back of racial segregation in the 1950s. And as racial apartheid was sedimenting in the 1890s and the turn of the century, 20th century. We know it's a lie, but history haunts. There's a wonderful passage that Baldwin wrote that I want to read to you. He says, and this is in response to a reporter in Esquire who was asking him about the urban rebellions. And the reporter asked him, he says, how can we get the Black people to cool it? And Baldwin said, it's not for us to cool it. And then the reporter says, but aren't you the ones who are getting hurt the most? And Baldwin says, no, we are only the ones who are dying fastest. The reporter didn't get what Jimmy was trying to say in that moment, that the burden of transforming this country has everything to do with white folk leaving behind this idea of whiteness. Let me be clear. I make a distinction between white people and those people who happen to be white. Those people who happen to be white are those folk who are grappling with this ideology of whiteness, who are trying to be anti-racist in their day-to-day lives. They understand that white supremacy functions for us like language. It comes to us as easily as words. So they're engaged in this ongoing work of deconstructing it as they try to imagine themselves differently. And then there are white people who are committed to the idea that whiteness ought to accord people distinct advantage. And you have to make a choice. Which side are you going to be on? And Baldwin was insisting on this with regards to the reporter, but then he makes a point about history. He says, I'm not trying to accuse you, you know. That's not the point. But you have a lot to face. All that can save you now is your confrontation with your own history, which is not your past, but your present. Nobody cares what happened in the past. One can't afford to care what happened in the past, but your history has led you to this moment. And you can only begin to change yourself and save yourself by looking at what you're doing in the name of your history. So this is what I've written at the end, near the end of the new book. And I'll read this and then I'll shut up and we can talk. Beginning again, or doing one's first works over, involves concrete efforts and stories to bring into reality a new America. You know, we're facing these two critical moments of moral reckoning where we face the daunting challenge of beginning again. And now we find ourselves facing a moral reckoning of the same magnitude. We should have learned the lesson by now that changing laws or putting our faith in politicians to do the right thing are not enough. We have to rid ourselves once and for all of this belief that white people matter more than others, or we're doomed to repeat the cycles of our ugly history over and over again. George Santayana, the Spanish-born American philosopher, was right to point out that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. But what he didn't say is that those who willfully refuse to remember become moral monsters. What we need is a third American founding, to begin again without this insidious idea of the value gap that continues to get in the way of a new America. We need an America where becoming white is no longer the price of the ticket. Instead, we should set out to imagine the country in the full light of its diversity and with an honest recognition of our sins. As the lynching memorial in Montgomery seeks to do, we have to confront our national trauma honestly if we are to shake loose from the political frame of Reaganism and Trumpism with its racial dog whistles and foghorns, its greed and selfishness, and its idealized version of America as the shining city on the hill where the country's sins are transformed into examples of its inherent goodness. This will demand of us a new American story, different symbols, and robust policies to repair what we've done. I don't yet know what this will look like in its details. And my understanding of our history suggests that we will probably fail trying. But I do know that each element is important to any effort toward beginning again. And as Samuel Beckett wrote in his 1983 novella, Worse with Hope, try again, fail again, fail better. Thank you so much. I appreciate you listening to me run my mouth. I look forward to the conversation.
Good. So Eddie, let me just start off with the first question. And I want to do a comparative analysis relative to reconciliation. As you know, in South Africa, to resolve the racial crisis there, they went through reconciliation. And I think it had a lot to do with whites and black trying to find some common ground. Here, we hope that legislation did it. We hope that we go through the good night and hope that the bright day of tomorrow comes up. But reconciliation has been a real issue for us here. Would you comment on possibly why reconciliation needs to happen now more than ever? Reparations maybe now more than ever because of the dynamics of the current situation?
Oh, absolutely. And we need to just simply say that Congresswoman Barbara Lee has introduced a House concurrent resolution precisely around this issue. But, you know, I want to say this, Brother Bailey, is that I think Brian Stevens has it right. Before there can be reconciliation, there has to be truth. Right. And so part of the challenge for us is that, you know, we live in this lie, this solution about the inherent virtue of American democracy and its people. So we have to tell the truth about what we've done. That doesn't mean we engage in this kind of self-flagellation, but it means acknowledging the cruelty and barbarity that makes America possible, so that we can open up the possibility for genuine reconciliation. So I think it's sequential. We got to tell the truth, and then we open up the space for reconciliation. But, you know, it's hard to tell the truth in this country because, you know, as Jimmy had this wonderful line. He said, one of the more frustrating aspects of being Black in this country is the ongoing work of having to convince white folk that what is happening to us is real. And he says it's hard to convince them because if they admit it, it says something about them. That many of our fellows have lived a life where we are incarcerating millions of folks, where they live in communities where they know the school systems are differentiated. They live in communities where they see the kinds of disparities that Freeholder Frisbee just laid out, and yet we're okay with it. So they have to ignore it. They have to be willfully ignorant about it. And remember what Jimmy says in 1963 in The Fire Next Time, the innocence is the crime. You can't do all of this devastation and then claim innocence. So the difficulty is, how do we tell the truth and tell the truth in such a way that it opens up space for us to imagine being together differently? So it's truth and reconciliation. People want to run to reconciliation. That's like Christians wanting to run to Easter and run past Saturday. You got to get through Saturday before you can get to resurrection. right? So we have to deal with the ugliness of who we are, to be honest with ourselves. Then we can begin reconciliation and repair. And what reparations will look like will vary, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Nice.
Janina, Sam, you have a question?
I have a quick question. It's really two-part. Now, I'm watching all of the protests, and it feels really nice. We're talking millions of people all around the world have been out there doing their thing. And I have my vote shirt on because to me, what's happening, it leads up to the big day in November. I'd like you to just talk to those of us who are a little anxious right now. And I know you're saying that it can't just be about Trump, and it shouldn't just be about Trump. But I will tell you, Doctor, that if on election night, when those votes are counted, and we find out that we have 4 more years, there are going to be some very devastated people, not just in this country, but in this world, because we want to start the healing. That's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question, and people joke about it, but it's real. What if we win and he won't leave? There's a possibility we could win. And he just will not leave. Speak to us about that, please.
So the second part of the question is really important. Whether he actually leaves office or whether he does. The one thing that we do know is that we have never had a former president who will behave like him. So he's not going to go off and paint.
There you go.
He's not going to go off and build a library. He's going to be actively monetizing his base. So the transition of power, the peaceful transition of power, is going to be disrupted in some kind of way. The least disruptive will be him leaving and then speaking regularly, commenting on whomever, on Biden's presidency and the like, right? Which is part of that disruption that we're going to experience. If he fails to leave, right, in a timely fashion, what the peaceful transition of power involves, it involves, right, in some ways socializing the incoming administration into the various portfolios that they need to govern and to move about in the world. One should be doubtful that they're going to, shall we say, hand over that information in a way. So we have to prepare ourselves for the first time, I think, in the history of the country, for a disruptive transition in power. That's the first thing. So so even when we think getting him out of office will be the answer, we need to understand that we still need to buckle up. We are still in the midst of a storm. Now, the first question is really important. We got to get him out of office. America cannot survive another 4 years of the Trump administration. We've seen the erosion of democratic institutions. We've seen the erosion of democratic norms. We've seen the theater of dictatorial power. He's given license to authoritarian and fascist sensibilities. Another 4 years of that, the country, I don't think, will survive. American democracy will be on a ventilator. Right? We will not survive, I don't think. But we also need to understand that voting is a part of a large strategy, because you have to think about this. Look at what happened in Georgia recently. When we do vote, when we understand it, they cheat.
Right.
And so when we invest in the process and people tell us, go vote, it is in the political process that we must make our power known. And then when people say, but wait a minute, the political process is rigged. The political process is shaped in such a way that we got to sit in line for 4 hours just to vote. And then they don't count it. And so we are exercising our civic responsibility, but then we have to confront the reality of a corrupt system. So this is what I'm saying to everyone. We got to vote. We got to turn out. We have to understand it. We got to continue to organize at the local level. We have to impact our freeholders, our council members, our mayors. We got our local prosecutors. We got to understand what the local and state level mean for really transforming the country. Understanding that national politics are absolutely key, but we need to understand what the down ballot elections actually mean, because you're going to change policing down ballot, right? You're going to change policing, right? Change how our communities are invested in interesting sorts of ways immediately in terms of who's governing. But we also need to understand, right, the limits of the current process. Don't come in naive, right? So that we can't place all of our faith in it. And let me just say this really quickly. I said these are 3 C's that we need to be aware of with Trump in the upcoming election. He's going to carpet bomb Biden. He's going to throw everything but the kitchen sink at it. And the Democrats can't play nice. They need to understand that they're going to throw everything under the sun. It's not just going to be Hunter Biden. They're going to throw everything under the sun at him. Then the second thing he's going to do is going to be the culture wars. He's going to stoke white resentment, white fears. And we know what happens when white fear is stoked. We see that with the Confederate monuments and the names of military bases and the speech in Tulsa. He's going to appeal to white resentment. And then the third C is that he's going to cheat. We need to understand those 3 and act accordingly.
What did you say the first one?
Dr. Glaude, quick question. So you mentioned a couple of times that we're experiencing a moral reckoning. Right, and we've seen with all the marches and everything going on that young people, this is one of the most diverse groups of people in protest that I've seen in my lifetime. We have a lot of our folks that are online that are watching, and I've been in conversation with a lot of people, white people across our county, that are seeing this, and they're coming to this moral reckoning, and they're trying to figure out where they fit in this movement. Where would you tell them to concentrate their efforts in helping them to understand how they can help this movement?
See, I think it's really important for us to well, let me just say it this way. Be committed to an idea, the reality of a more just society, right? At the end of the day, that's what we're fighting for, a just society. What is your role in that? Right? I mean, that's very clear. If you think disparities in education are wrong, then we need to fix our educational system, right? If you think that the wealth gap has everything to do with, at least in part, residential segregation, right? We need to think about housing policy, zoning law, and the like, right? So the idea here, right, is not, how can I put this? Jimmy Baldwin had this wonderful line where he says, it's a provocative line. He says he's deeply suspicious of white liberals. He says, I don't want anybody doing anything for me. I want someone doing stuff with me. Right. So we need to shift our understanding of racial inequality. As I said, as I argued before in my previous book, we can't think of racial equality as a philanthropic enterprise, as a charitable enterprise. Usually white allyship gets us into trouble when folk think they're coming to give us something. Or then they ask us to give them, to help them see something. The clear thing, where's your place in this? Fight for a more just world. That's where, and then find the space to do that work. Is it fight for 15 and a living wage? Is it around healthcare? Fight for a more just world, and we can stand side by side. What we're seeing out in the streets are young people, folks across the board. They're part of the resistance. They're part of Black Lives Matter, but they all assume that America is broken. And they're out there risking their lives in the midst of a global pandemic, right, for a more just world. It's not charity. It's not helping Black people. It's for a more just world. And the best of the Black freedom tradition is about a more just world.
Well, that's been outstanding conversation. Eddie, it's always a pleasure to be in your company and to be inspired by such great thoughts and great wisdom. Sam, you want to make your final comments relative to Professor Glaude?
Dr. Glaude, we are so grateful that you came to spend this time with us, and we're hoping that this won't be the last time. But you brought the fire today, and we truly appreciate that. And we're hoping that the people that were out there viewing, that they began to figure out how to marry some of their own personal mission work with the work that's being done out there already by young people and more seasoned people alike. So thank you once again for spending this time with us. We're really grateful.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Janine, you have anything you want to say with Dr. Glaude?
Simply that I'll see you in the morning. I'll see you in the morning. You never disappoint. This was magnificent. It made me go get my fan, and I had to you took us to church. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, Dr. Glaude, thank you for giving us such a good perspective on action, positive change, and the healing that we need to move our community and our country and the world forward. So I appreciate you very much. Thank you so much.
Appreciate that. Appreciate you, Doc.
All right, having said that, we're going to go straight to our response panel, and we're going to give them an opportunity to respond to Dr. Glaude's comments or some thoughts of their own on racism in America and in Mercer County. I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes each, but I'm going to take the time and introduce each one of them. Our first person to introduce, and I'll introduce all of them, and then we'll come back with their comments. This state legislature represents the 15th Legislative Assembly District, which includes Trenton. She is our Assemblywoman. She is our family, friend, leader, who is doing good work for us in the New Jersey Assembly, the Honorable Assemblywoman Verlena Jackson Reynolds. Welcome, Verlena.
Hello, hello, hello. Can you see me?
The godfather of Black business and business opportunity and development in New Jersey. He's a tireless advocate and champion in his pursuit of Black economic opportunity for New Jersey citizens and businesses. Mr. John Harmon, President and CEO of the African American Chamber of Commerce. And then we have not flashy, not loud. She's quiet and unassuming, yet tough as nails. As our mayor, a real community leader for a better Trenton. Please welcome Jeanette Smart, President of the Trenton NAACP. Former gang member turned activist and pastor of the Transformation Church, who has the ability to connect with people from the streets to the suites. Sounds like a young Tracy Syphax to me, but the pastor, Antonio Bellamy. Welcome, Antonio. And then youth activist, local real estate investor, mother, constituent purpose representative for Congressman Bonnie Watson Coleman, and a sister of all trades, Josie Edwards. Josie, welcome. And so what I like to do, starting with our Assemblywoman, is to give each of you a couple minutes or so, just talk about Dr. Glaude's comments and your thoughts on racism in America and in Mercer County. Assemblywoman Reynolds.
First, I want to thank Sam for Freeholder Frisbee and the Black Area Caucus for inviting me to this panel. I think Mama LaRue said it best. We are all fans of Dr. Glaude, but to actually hear him go into some depth and actually do some teaching today was just really at a different level. We've all been to protests and marches when we're organizing, we're strategizing, we're planning. And I think the sociology of it all really is what was thought-provoking for me today. And to think about how we move forward and making sure that we encompass everyone. I know I'm getting a lot of calls, I'm sure you all too, about how we can help. How do we get into the fight with you? How do we stand with you? And I thought it was very interesting when he said, racism and injustices, we're not looking for give outs. We're not looking for philanthropic giving. We're looking for you to get into this fight with us and make sure that there is inclusion for everyone, not just equity, but inclusion so that we can all rise together. And so I know I'm taking this all back. We have a lot coming up in the legislature in terms of racial inequities that we're trying to address. We have some bills, but we're just working really, really diligently. And I'm glad to see a lot of the young activists and old-time activists as well. John Harmon's on here that always talks about building wealth in our class. And so I thank you all for being a part of it. I'm interested in hearing what everyone else has to say as well. But I'm in here to fight and continue to fight on as we must do.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Brother Harmon, you know, a lot of folks and a lot of the conversation lately has been focused on police and police reform. Yet there are a number of us who believe that while that needs to be dealt with, that may be a distraction from the real issues of economic opportunity and healthcare, you know, that type of activity. Can you comment on, from a business perspective, one, on Dr. Glaude's thoughts on racism, but also how you see that impacting the economic clout for Black Americans nationally and in New Jersey, and potentially in Mercer County?
Well, John, thank you so much for the question. And Dr. Glaude, I'm a fan as well. I watch you regularly on Morning Joe. But I think your question, John, is at the heart of this whole conversation. Is all about Black people in America still being treated as chattel. In other words, of having no value. But before we went live, we had a little conversation with Dr. Glaude, and he talked about white supremacy with Black leaders in control. And oftentimes when we talk about white supremacy, we often speak about it in terms of violence and criminal justice, but very little focus on the economic disparities that exist past and present. And I think there's a sense of supremacy as well. So I still, unfortunately, as an unfortunate backdrop, there's a huge opportunity for us as a people to stand up our relevance, our value proposition to society in this reconciliation and this resetting time. That's what I'm looking forward to. We must seize the moment. It's almost like when Booker T. Washington established the Negro Business League in 1900. Folks were migrating north, and he got folks to pause and look at the economic opportunity, what ultimately could put us all in a better place. I will say this, and I like to have some follow-up with Dr. Glaude around this subject. I just believe that the structure of Black organizations in America are not aligned at the present to fully capitalize on these opportunities that are going to be presented before us. The Black Chamber, the Black Church, the Urban League, the NAACP, for the most part, we're still working in silos. And until we coalesce a unified strategy, we're not going to be able to deliver the resources, opportunities, information back to our people in a way that can be departmentalized and leveraged for their transformation. So we still have a lot of people that look like us that are enamored by their positions of authority and allowing this undercurrent of supremacy to exist, notwithstanding we have over-indexed in terms of our support for one political party and not fully leveraging the other, over-indexed in terms of just voting for people without getting accountability. So in this truth, there has to be an acknowledgement on both sides that we're all have some culpability here. But in this resetting, I would encourage my brothers and sisters, let's be about us collectively and not about ourselves individually. Thank you.
Thank you, John. As a segue into our next speaker, America's greatest crime against a Black man was not slavery or lynching, but that he was taught to wear a mask of self-hate and self-doubt. Our next speaker represents the oldest civil rights organization in the country, at the forefront of doing the work that needs to be done on behalf of the Black community. While many of us are dealing with the health pandemic, the NAACP has been dealing with the racial pandemic for hundreds of years here. And so with that, would you please welcome Jeanette Smart? And Jeanette, would you share your thoughts on Dr. Glaude's comments or your thoughts on racism in America and Mercer County? I can't hear. Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Glaude, I follow him a lot. I've known him for some time. I like to say that we are friends. I invited him my first year's NAACP as our Freedom Fund speaker. he's heavy. He's heavy in his words and he's heavy in his thought process. And I think that's what we need a lot of times, is something heavy and not always jovial and clownish. So I always like the way he presents himself. You're right. We've been dealing with racism, discrimination for a very, very long time. And one of the ways the NAACP likes to handle that is through policy changes. Had it not been for the NAACP, we probably wouldn't be able to have this format right now that we're having. And as I said yesterday at a talk in Hopewell Township, the NAACP has and still has its white friends, its white supporters. And I think that's important as well. I think we do need to focus on a lot of what Dr. Glaude said in terms of how we look at changing America or beginning again. Getting rid of Donald Trump isn't the only way to have us reclaim who we are. Donald Trump will leave behind many of his supporters who have him being or supporting strongly who he is today and bringing out the hidden racism of white supremacy as we have always known it to be. Right now, I think the best part about him is the fact that others are seeing what white supremacy really looks like. I think that Chauvin showed it the best, even though we've seen it before with Rodney King and others. And I think that the unconsciousness of innocence or ignorance that has been built within this country throughout, particularly here in America with our white brothers and sisters, is now becoming the awakening. And I've always said there needs to be an awakening. And so I think I see with the awakening. The awakening is not just in our white brothers and sisters, but it's also in our youth. I've always said that I think the change will come when our youth get involved, when our youth take the lead, when our youth takes the momentum and carries it forth. And I'm so happy to see our youth standing up and standing in front and saying we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. I think that as we move forward, we have to hold all people accountable. And that includes ourselves from sitting back and allowing some of these things to happen when we could have been in the forefront of change ourselves some time ago. I think we need to, instead of placating our politicians and saying, thanks for coming to the cookout, we need to hold some fire to their feet as well. For those who do well, we need to let them know we like what you're doing and we want you to continue, but we also need this from you. And for those who haven't been doing well, we need to sit them down. We need to get rid of them, like the Mitch McConnells and the Grahams and others. As we move forward, we need to have a plan of where it is we want to go. What way do we want to get there? And after we get there, what will we do? If we keep having protests without action, protests without demands, protests just because it feels good when we're doing it, then as Professor Glaude says, there's not going to be much of a change. We're going to stay where we are. What does that new beginning look like for us as African Americans? How will we express that? And I think the best of us to give that answer to us are those who will be here long after we're gone, and that is our youth. And I think as elders, as Sam liked to call us, we need to listen to our youth and help them move the movement. I'm so excited that the NAACP is now getting application requests from our younger people. I also agree with John. I think we have to come together as a collective unit and not be so divisive among ourselves. The stronger we are collectively, the better it is for our communities. And so I could go on, but I'm going to stop right now.
All right. Thank you. Well, we know you got preacher in you. You got preacher in you. We came here in a nightmare, searching for the American dream. And the NAACP spokesman just before talked about our youth. And it's been said many times that the civil rights movement and much of the activity that's gone on from a movement perspective started with our young people. I tell, and I'm sidebarring here, I tell Tracy Syfax all the time that his story from gang member to successful businessman is the story of the city of Trenton. Yet there are other people who are living that same story, and one of them is Antonio Bellamy, former gang member, turned activist and pastor, has his own church, is talking and delivering a message to the people in the streets and the people in the suites. So Antonio, here's an opportunity to talk to everybody, suites, streets, folks who are in home, staying safe. Share with us your perspective on Dr. Glaude's comments or your thoughts on racism in America and Mercer County.
Yeah. I thought Dr. Glaude did a phenomenal job in speaking, man. It was my first time hearing him publicly speak. I've read some stuff from him, and some of my friends are really fond of him, man, but it's my first time reading him. What struck me was just the way he could weave in and out of history, and his quotes from James Baldwin. I think he talked about the quote from James Baldwin where to be, an African American in America is to be conscious is to be in a constant state of rage and anger all the time. And to be honest, that's a reality for a lot of people right now. That was my story. I was a man who didn't understand what it meant to be me growing up where I grew up, and I didn't really understand the truth of systemic racism and how that was impacting me. And for me, part of the reason why I think that that's important to engage and sort of talk about, man, is because when you look at a lot of these people, one of my frustrating points in this whole dialogue is so many people want to talk about the looting in the streets, but they don't want to talk about what they're responding to, right? And I think Dr. Glaude, he mentioned it. He talked about Dr. King's quote when he said the riot is the voice of the unheard. These are people who want to be heard. And I was one of those young men, man, and just tying that into this anger about particularly how African Americans are policed in America is a huge deal. Given that I came from that type of lifestyle where I did things and participated in criminal activity, I think there's something to be said that we need to understand that being criminal doesn't mean that one is disposable. When you really think about it, some of the people who have contributed the most to American society were people who were put in prison before. Dr. Martin Luther King went to prison. Malcolm X went to prison. Rosa Parks went to prison. Jesus Christ of Nazareth went to prison. And so there's something wrong with America's justice system when it reduces people, particularly people of color, African Americans, to be criminal, to be disposable simply because they have participated in criminal activity. And that's the type of language that makes people angry. Black America in particular, man. I think as a pastor, it's my heart, man. I believe what Dr. Eric Mason says, man, in his book, The Woke Church. He says that one of the things that he laments as it relates to this issue is that the church didn't say Black Lives Matter first. We should have said that first. We should be leading. We should be using our pulpits to lead the public the way Dr. King and so many others did during the civil rights movement. And so I lament the fact that Black Lives Matter had to say that first. While we champion the notion that Black Lives Matter in and of itself, the reality is I think that the movement needs a spiritual vitality that was going to lead to the endurance that it needs. This is why Dr. King and so many others, Fannie Lou Hamer during that time were able to endure such hardships and difficulties, man. And so that's part of what I just want to share, man. I think that there's a need for us to hear the hurt and the cries of our people in this time. And I think the church needs to create a space where I don't think we talk about this enough. In this age where we're constantly angry about this, the church needs to create a space for people to be able to vent that anger and frustration and pain in private ways. Right? We can't point them out for looting in the streets, and we haven't created safe environments in our churches for them to loot, to be angry and frustrated with the things that are going on in their life. There's so much more that I can talk about, man, and share, man. But I want to be faithful to the time. But I am an example that the God of the Bible, in particular, man, has the ability to make somebody who was a criminal, upstanding citizen in his community, and then use his voice to be able to honor his name and help other people do the same, man. And so we got to stop treating criminals like they're disposable.
Appreciate those comments, Antonio. What the people really want is simple: for America to be as good as its promise. And so, Jazzy, talk to us about America being as good as its promise. You work for Congressman Bonnie Watson Coleman, who is every day at the forefront of trying to make sure that America lives up to its promise. Welcome, Jazzy.
Thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be here amongst prominent Black leaders in the greater Trenton area. I think that, the American dream was never meant for Black people or anyone outside of being white. And it does not include us. These laws do not include us. The amendments do not include us. The 13th Amendment says so. Slavery was never abolished. It was evolved into the prison systems that we see today. So when we talk about the American dream and the things that we fight for, equality, inclusion, just our basic right to live. Working for the Congresswoman, I feel very blessed. I feel very honored to be working for the first African-American woman in the New Jersey Congress. So in my years of working for her, I've seen so many different things, but I'm not going to talk about what I do in the office. I want to talk about how it's hard for us to be a part of this American dream, how things are very much disproportionate. I want to reference what Dr. Glaude said about disproportionate income and disproportionate housing and things of that nature. How can we even begin to touch the American dream if we can't even qualify for loans, or qualify for anything of that nature to be able to elevate ourselves out of our plight? So, I mean, a lot of that starts with education. When we talk about the youth and we talk about accessing that American dream, I think education is first and foremost. We're not taught civics, we're not taught economics, we're not taught financial literacy in our educational system. Therefore, how can we expect people to vote if they don't even know the importance of it? How can we expect them to participate in the democracy of this country if we aren't even fairly taught to be a part of the game? So I guess what I wanted to talk about is the youth and where we come in at, institutional racism and how it affects the youth in the community in the Trenton area. So the things that I see, beginning with the educational level, the disenfranchisement of the Black families. I could go on and on and on about recidivism, jail versus rehab, the war on drugs, the emphasis on athletics and academics. So how we get the youth involved is education reform, having civics and economics and financial literacy and so many other things taught in the schools. And when the kids start to graduate high school, they'll be contributing citizens to their society. They'll know how to vote, how to lobby their legislators, how to be involved in the entire process of the election and holding their legislators and their leaders accountable, how to hold themselves accountable. A lot of people don't even know that we have a civic duty to this country, and that's not taught. So we have a lot of work to do. I mean, civic engagement in the schools is first and foremost. There's a huge disconnect between our elected officials and our school systems. So these children don't even know that half of these offices exist. They don't know what an assembly is, a city council is, or a Mercer County freeholder, or a congresswoman. We're taught in history what the amendments are and how they came to be. And we were taught that racism and slavery is history. And we were taught that segregation is history, but these things are very much alive and well. And, a lot of people, I just feel like the youth weren't properly educated, that we were blindsided, that, that we were taught one thing in school, that racism doesn't exist, that it's been totally eradicated from our, infrastructure of this country, that segregation is done. Segregation is alive and well. We could just look at the affordable housing for an example. You look at affordable housing in the white communities versus the Black communities. We have projects, not, we have, just plight, period. We can't get into Princeton. We can't get into areas like that because our income doesn't meet their requirements. They have high incomes and high rent and disproportionate incomes. So we're dealing with gentrification right now at this moment. We have a lot of apartments being built in the city of Trenton that a lot of Black people can't afford. And we're stuck in the projects. We're stuck in these affordable housing areas where they want us to stay. So
Thank you.
They want us there. So
all right. So thank you. I appreciate that. And I want to throw this out here for the panelists for a minute. Dr. Glaude talked about that white folks didn't believe that we were getting beat and that we were getting hung until during the civil rights movement, it was shown on TV. We were able to see the hoses, the dogs, the hitting with the batons. Now we're dealing with the vest cameras on the police. We're now dealing with the cameras on our phones. And so we're able to see what is going on. And so for the first time in a long time, we're all in the same book, pretty much in the same chapter, and pretty much on the same page. If that's the case, and we know that we have an opportunity to do unique things here, Valina and John, real quick, can each one of you comment on how y'all see the world moving forward?
Well, I think, we talk about moving forward. I think Jossie really hit it on the head. And, I just did a quick retrospect into what I've been doing. And the civics part is right. But I think, I have to say kudos to PJ Hill, because I've been over there talking about civics and in different schools. I've done it throughout the district. But they oftentimes focus more on the federal level and not the state, and definitely not the county or the local. But the issue is the same. It's just how the money gets trickled down. And so when we talk about after you graduate from high school, we're talking about going on to a trade or college, that financial piece that Jossie talked about, how are you going to pay for that? Is not taught, about what's affordable, what's not affordable, but I want to go here anyway, and making those decisions based upon where I'm most likely to succeed. At the end, we want you to be successful, whether it's a certification or it's a diploma. We want you to be successful in that. And so, it goes even deeper into what Dr. Glaude was talking about in terms of systemic racism. We're in this area where our educational system is not at the top of the peak. We often struggle with remediation or underprivileged and not having the technology to be able to offer our students more. So we're already at the back of the list. And then our parents were at the back of the list, and their parents were at the back of the list. But when you move to those upper areas, into suburbia and other areas where education is a priority, those families, their students are getting the best education. Their parents got a good education, and their grandparents got a good education. So when we start to look at how far we are back and how far we have to go forward, this is why we're always working double hard to get what we have to get. It's not to say that we're not at a point in this new metrics that we're in to say, listen, we want this, we want A, B, and C, not X, Y, and Z. And so I think we need to look upon our leaders, whether you're on the school board, whether you're on council, you're on zoning boards and planning boards, but definitely to be able to focus on how do we uplift these communities. And we need people to be there that can do that and stay focused, because there's a lot of chaos out there that will take you off the path that we're trying to do, building up our communities.
Stay woke. John?
Well, again, John, I thank you. Jen and LaRue and everyone for giving us an opportunity to speak tonight. You know, I immediately thought about Emmett Till when you talk about, you know, people being able to see what injustices they've done to our people. But my word to my colleagues out there that have the responsibility of owning some of the what it takes to connect our people to a better life in America. So I would say to them, stay in your lane, own your obligation of your mission back to your people, make yourself accountable and transparent. I've been having a lot of conversations this past week, with CEOs of major corporations in the states, financial institutions, and they all seem to be willing to do something now that the world is turned upside down. So I'm very specific in what I'm asking. I'm asking that more Blacks be on these corporate boards across the state of New Jersey, more contracts to Black businesses, more Black hires, and investment of dollars to areas of underperformance to mitigate many of these disparities. And then lastly, to our elected officials, I'm challenging them as well. Policies as it relates to transparency in public spend. Blacks on a good day may get 3% of public contracts. Local municipalities, it might be even less. Discrimination in auto insurance, credit reports, occupation, education. That's the law in New Jersey. That's absolutely ridiculous. Has nothing to do with one's ability to drive. So we cannot continue to go along and get along. At the end of the day, we too must hold ourselves to account. Thanks, John.
Okay. I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. And I think that sort of capsulizes the conversation this evening, and it allows us then to move towards closure. Because one of the things that we wanted to do is be able to respect Janine's time frame. And so having said that, I want to thank Dr. Glaude. I want to thank all of the panelists for their comments. I'm going to turn this back to Freeholder Frisbee to close us out. But I say to Jeanette and to Jossie and to Antonio and to Valina and to John, I look forward to partnering up, continue to partner up, continue to do the work. In the words of the Portuguese, a luta continua, the struggle continues. And so now I turn back to my good friend, Freeholder Sam Frisbee.
Bob, thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists. You guys were absolutely incredible. I was watching the comments on the Zoom and on Facebook, and you guys did a phenomenal job. To Dr. Eddie Glaude, thank you so much. You really kicked this off for us. And I really want people to recognize and understand that this is not the end of the conversation. This was actually the beginning of the conversation. We wanted to pull people together so that we could have this conversation, and recognizing that we have so many people across this county that want to figure out how to help. This is our way to really help. I've said it before and I'll say it again. In the area of social justice, this is our Me Too movement moment. This is our opportunity to band together. We see the inequities. What are we going to do about them? And so I'm calling on people around our county to help us and join with us as we begin to really look at working out this Human Relations Committee so that we can begin to figure out how we become more equitable, right? We can talk about equality, and many times when we talk about giving funding to municipalities, we talk about it in the language of equality. We want more equity. Right? We want to be more equitable in how we distribute our funds. And the only way that we can do that is to know where we see inequities and have data that backs it up. So we appreciate you. I'm not going to be the last word because our sponsor is going to have the last word tonight, but I am so grateful to her as well for allowing us to use the LaRuelist Cafe platform to have this initial discussion. And again, we have other discussions planned out to begin to talk about the inequities in housing, the inequities in education, the inequities in policing, the financial inequities. We have to begin to discuss those and find out where we're having the biggest challenges. And once we do that, then we can begin to pressure our legislators, people like me, who we can say, this is where we need the help, right? That's where we want you to focus. So thank you so much and have a great evening. You're muted.
There's nothing worse than having a muted Janine LaRue. That is scary. I want to thank Sam, thank John, and thank this caucus. This has been one amazing conversation today. The panel, every last one of you, profound statements. And I'm going to go back when I can kick my feet up tonight and pull this show up on my TV. I want to watch it again because there was a lot of good stuff that was put out here today. I was looking at the comments of those on Facebook, those on YouTube, those on Zoom. And I tell you, we were just taken to church by all of you and our leader, Dr. Eddie Glaude. It is just amazing. The final thing I want to say about this platform, and many organizations have already figured it out. LaRuelist Cafe does not belong to me. It belongs to the viewers. And whenever we have an opportunity to sponsor any event that coincides with the philosophies that I believe in, I am a committee of one. So philosophies that I believe in, just give me a phone call, inbox me on Facebook. If it's something that appears to be worth viewing, yes, we will let you come on LaRuelist Cafe. We will sponsor you. We'll do all the background info. This is our 21st show. It seems almost hard to believe that we have been doing this 21 shows. So thank you for coming on. I really, really appreciate all of our supporters. We just reached over 900 likes the other day without even trying, and we know that it's going to soar even more in the next few weeks. Thank you. Love you all. Have a good night.